now we're looking at what we'll call revealed preferences, market definition, stages of production, and critique of monopoly theory. So here's so partial equilibrium is, so now we're looking at the market for tennis rackets. You're starting to make assumptions. You're now assuming that all the costs and benefits are contained within this transaction. That excludes spillovers, negative and positive spillovers. If anybody has any comments while we're going through, just shout it out. So let's say market for tennis rackets, and it's Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and it's my demand for tennis rackets. Okay, subjective demand, subjective utility. Then now using revealed preferences of cash register data or metadata on the internet. You can now aggregate data, so now let's just say it's tennis rackets for the entire United States, but you're still only looking at tennis rackets is the market. So tennis rackets are made out of plastic, they're made out of metal, they're made out of animal gut for the strings, they're made out of many different things. So I wrote here partial equilibrium, general equilibrium. So mainstream applied microeconomists working for the Department of Labor or the FCC or whatever, Bureau of Labor Statistics, they look at the market for tennis rackets in the USA, and they look at it based on revealed preferences, the past. So they use this past statistical data to then model the future with some, where you're based on risk, with some type of Bayesian distribution in the short term. So that's partial equilibrium. That's the model that regulatory economists use. But as long as there's no barriers to entry, this is on my website from the Law and Liberty listserv. As long as there's no barriers to entry, you don't have any monopoly. As long as you don't have control over the stages of production. So regulatory theory ignores stages of production. So as economic thinkers, thinking about social welfare, the welfare of society, and what creates wealth is competition. Brings you quality and quantity. So as long as you don't have any barriers to entry, then you don't have a monopoly, which is different than the way mainstream regulatory economists look at it. They say, okay, there's four firms that have a monopoly, or four firms have 85% of the tennis racket market. So we need to break up those tennis racket firms, or we need to regulate them. Yes. So that's the point I'm trying to make is, I write scientism here. So there's nothing wrong with aggregating data to understand patterns, especially if you're an entrepreneur trying to project out for future demand. There's nothing wrong with that. For example, I've been buying tennis balls from the internet, and I've noticed that the ones I used to buy are no longer available, but a little bit more expensive ones are now available. So I think they've got me targeted. Tennis balls for Cameron Weber are a necessity, so therefore we can do price discrimination and maximize our profits. And then I also got an email from somebody that asked me to, would you be interested in a newsletter around tennis, right? So they're creating demand using data. It's obvious. But, so there's nothing wrong with using aggregated data to create value in exchange. No one forced me to buy tennis balls. No one's forcing me to use Amazon. I can go somewhere else and get them. So there's nothing wrong in a voluntary context doing that, unless because you click the button that says I agree to the terms, right? And there's nothing preventing you and I from creating a search engine that you pay $10 a month for and we don't sell your data, right? So there's nobody preventing someone from creating an alternative search engine through a voluntary entry and exit into the market. So, but we're concerned, or at least the type of thinking I'm trying to instill here is long-term thinking, where regulatory economists are narrow in their view when they're trying to break up monopolies, because it's not really a monopoly if you have free entry and exit. So scientism is only, Hayek calls this the abuse of reason, where you believe that science can basically rewrite the past into a new future, right? The extreme example is Marxism, but less extreme examples are regulatory economists, who Schumpeter says are usually envious and want to be associated with power. They would, some of us might say, abuse science in order to get control over society. That would be scientism. There's nothing wrong with the scientific method as an exploratory method. It's only when you apply it as the end result to human existence. But then we can look at, in terms of moving from partial equilibrium into the unknown and unknowable uncertainty in the long term, then we can start enlarging our thinking. So tennis, I don't buy tennis rackets because tennis rackets give me utility. Tennis is an experience good, right? So it's the experience good that brings me value. I'm getting better and better. Well, I'm trying to get better and better at it. And then, so here would be the stages of production. In just a two-dimensional plane, this doesn't even include, well, this is your vertical integration. And this would be your horizontal integration, which includes geography. So when you look at the stages of production, where are you locating the tennis courts? Wholesale, retail, public good, right? As long as there's competition, then you'll get the best tennis courts. But in order, so let's focus on tennis rackets. So here's the grip is made out of oil, and then, right, so oil's here, you refine the oil, and then you make the plastics, and then so here's the grip, and then here is the racket itself made out of aluminum. Starts with mining through smelting and rolling the aluminum into the robotics, to then, which is huge if you've ever been to a paper mill or aluminum manufacturing mill. It's huge robotics, huge. So, and then here, the animal gut, which makes up the strings, and all of this then accumulates in the assembly, which then gets distributed. And that's just the racket itself. That doesn't include the courts or the tennis balls. So if you look at the larger picture, so let's just focus on the tennis racket market. There's nobody that has, Wilson or Penn. They don't have a monopoly power in aluminum smelting. They don't have a monopoly in robotics. So as long as you have free entry and exit into the stages of production, the end result being, in this case, the experience good, then no one really has a monopoly, because there's nothing preventing people from substituting in and out of the stages of production. So as long as you you put in complements, substitutes along the stages of production, then you get a general equilibrium, and you no longer are worried about the short-term monopolies, as defined by whom, why, and how. So if you are a regulatory economist needing to justify your position, well then, right, if you're a hammer, then the world always looks like a nail. So if you're a regulatory economist, well, then you're going to define the market as the tennis racket market. If you're a regulatory economist, you're going to look at search engines. But you're ignoring the stages of production. So competitive free market economists like myself realize that if you take into consideration complements and substitutes, you're moving into a general equilibrium pattern away from scientific partial equilibrium pattern. And the short-term Bayesian distribution cannot explain creative destruction and economic growth, which is obviously a big critique of this type of thinking. So, any comments on that? Questions, comments, criticisms, suggestions? So I've been making all of these available, and so I'll make this one available as well on the teaching channel. Does anybody have anything to say? Overseas? Okay.